Okay, last fluff question has to do with cryptocurrencies and what you see as the future of cryptocurrencies. Let me read it specifically because it came from one of the viewers. What is the future of cryptocurrencies? This is from Amjad. Many CEOs are buying crypto as a store of value. Your thoughts on it? Who is Satoshi Nakamoto? Your views on Bitcoin and proof of work algorithms versus Ethereum and proof of stake. Quite a few questions within
It's a
there.
long story because we've been quite involved in the whole crypto world for a variety of different reasons. But I'll tell you the thing that is most ironic to me about the crypto world, which is back in the 1980s, I had this idea about computational irreducibility, the idea that you might need to do an irreducible amount of computation to work certain things out. I I have some considerable reason to believe that the the creator of Bitcoin was aware of my work about computational irreducibility. And so the thing that is kind of the most ironic, most bizarre thing is that when I thought about computational irreducibility in the 1980s, the I imagined it as this limitation on science, this principle about something formal and mathematical. I had no idea that decades later there would be, whatever it is, some number of percentage points of the total energy production of the world would be burnt in computational irreducibility. It's an utterly bizarre, it's kind of like if for somebody like me, I build theories, I build tools, and then the world goes on and eventually it uses those theories and those tools for things that are just, that one was something so far out of left field that I couldn't see coming that it's remarkable. That idea of proof of work is completely crazy. To be fair, it's very amusing and completely crazy. And, I have certainly thought about, is there a way to do something like proof of work that generates useful computation? And I have not yet figured out how to do that. But with respect to cryptocurrency, and for example, the question, why is there value in cryptocurrency? I had thought, well, to get value in economics, you have to actually be making something in the real world. And I had thought for a while, we've been a lot involved in computational contracts, the idea of expressing what would otherwise be contracts written in legalese in computational language, because we have kind of the unique computational language that can talk about the real world and that is therefore capable of having, contracts about the real world written in it. So we've done quite a bit of work on that. And I sort of imagine my belief as a few years ago was that when computational contracts are the dominant form of contracts, that cryptocurrencies just become a convenient mechanism for sort of servicing computational contracts. But then the question is there intrinsic value in a cryptocurrency? And so this relates to the question of, well, why is there intrinsic value in anything in economics? And so that relates to, well, what is the foundational theory of economics? And so this is something I've been thinking about. And, I think that the elementary actions in economics are transactions. And I think that what's happening is there's this whole giant network of transactions. Why does this sound like something that's heard elsewhere? Well, because I think it maybe is. It's something not unlike the giant network of updatings of this spatial hypergraph and so on. It's all these different transactions happening in the world. And the story ends up being that what is value? What is price, for example? Price is something related to, so think about it this way. I've been using this thing the last few weeks at least. Somebody wants to buy a cookie. The person they want to buy it from eventually wants to rent a movie. The question is there in a certain world where it's AI bots all the way down, one could imagine that they arrange this network of transactions so that the person who wants to buy the cookie eventually is giving value to the person who wants to rent the movie. They barter everything, so that's what happens. No money is involved. It's just bot-to-bot transactions, right? So the question is, what is money? What is price? And I think what it could be thought of as, I don't know if this will really work out, that it is just like you have all these sort of interactions in space and so on, and in aggregate you can think about them as having certain gravitational fields, certain this, that, and the other, certain aggregate properties. That is a description of all of those microscopic processes that are going on. So I have this slight guess that value and price are associated with sort of an aggregate version of all these microscopic processes that are going on. And the most bizarre thing is that what leads those things to have a sort of a robust value is computational irreducibility. So the absolutely bizarre possibility is that the transactions that go on in an economic system are sort of in aggregate, they are a whole story of computational irreducibility. And the reason that they build up some definite sort of solid sense of price or value is because you sort of can't unravel that computational irreducibility. And so in some sense, the computational irreducibility is the source of robust value in economics. And then that, in a sense, the bizarre thing then is proof of work is a crazy sort of in a bottle version of that process, so to speak.
Proof of work?
Yes, the proof of work is ends up being sort of the bottled up version of that idea, although it's a poor way to think about that. And I think that what I'm imagining is that the very fact that so many people are doing things with cryptocurrencies is almost by definition a proof that they have value. That is, it could be the case that you say, well, everybody is doing things as a speculator, which might be close to true. But even so, by the time there's a complicated enough network of transactions, that is in a sense building you up a real value, even though those transactions don't happen to actuate particularly in the quotes real world. I mean, this is, for somebody like me who builds sort of a model of the universe that is in a sense an abstract model, one's asking, is there a fundamental difference between the processes that are going on in this purely abstract cryptocurrency and in something that is connected to the real world and buying cookies and so on in the real world? And the answer is, I'm increasingly coming to the belief that there is a notion of a store of value that doesn't have to do with sort of the details of that. Now, as a practical matter, what's going to happen with all these cryptocurrencies, I have no idea. We've been involved in the cryptocurrency world, so, at this point I am the proud owner of a certain amount of cryptocurrency, and it's been interesting for me because I've never done, our technology, our Wolfram language and Mathematica and so on, get widely used by quant finance people. But I've never personally done kind of trading of those things on any kind of serious kind of actual trading screens type basis. And so it's kind of a funny thing because I have a company with lots of people in it, but in the end we've gotten cryptocurrency from a bunch of companies that we work with. And it's like, what do we do with this cryptocurrency? My longtime CFO was like, we can't accept this cryptocurrency. What the heck are we going to do with it? And, how do we account for it and so on? Anyway, we finally solved those problems. But so I have been, I did have an amusing time a few weeks ago when I was both spending some number of hours working on the question of why does the universe exist and multitasking between that and cryptocurrency trading. And that was kind of an interesting personal experience.
You were actively trading crypto?
What's that?
You were actively trading crypto?
Yes, because we got a bunch of cryptocurrency, and we, my calculation is by the time it's, the real problem was that within my company, it was like, who do we delegate the cryptocurrency trading to? And generally, the general principle of companies is, the CEO, it starts with the CEO, and then they try and find somebody to delegate it to. And if, we have about 800 people, but, if none of them was kind of volunteering, I'm going to be the cryptocurrency trader, it kind of sticks with the CEO. But I was also just interested to get some intuitive feeling for it, which I think I do have now, a better feeling for. But it was just from a purely personal point of view, the couple of days that I happened to spend sort of multitasking between figuring out why the universe exists and figuring out how we should move this or that between cryptocurrencies was an interesting experience, let's say. I would say that we're actually we have all the apparatus in Wolfram language to build some very fancy analytics for understanding what happens with cryptocurrencies, and we're just starting to do that. It's so deeply analogous to what's happened in quantitative finance. I think it's the question of is there going to be some store of value in the world that isn't gold and isn't fiat currency? The answer is presumably yes, unless governments get so freaked out about it that they manage to sort of smash it. I think that is it good for the world? Though that's a more complicated question. Is it something where where one can understand, is there some way, actually it's a good exercise, in this theory of economics that I'm sort of slowly developing, there are going to be analogues of things like time dilation and things like the Einstein equations. It's a necessary feature of this very aggregated thing of lots of these transactions. And so then the question is, well, one of the things I was joking with as we were working on this a bit, that inflation in economics might turn out to be bizarrely similar to inflation in cosmology.
What do you mean that there's an analog of the Einstein field equations in economics?
Well, you've got a whole space of transactions, right? You've got all these transactions happening, and you've got this question is, you've got all these transactions happening, and one thing is to say there's a global price. But actually, that probably isn't true. You've got all these transactions happening, and they're all interwoven in certain ways. And you ask questions like, is that space, for example, arbitrage? You go round a loop. It's like going around a loop in space-time. You go around a loop between this transaction and it goes in time, it goes to that transaction and so on. The question of whether there is an arbitrage opportunity becomes a question of whether there's curvature in this kind of economic space. And so that's the beginning. I haven't worked this theory out. Okay, so I don't know how it's all going to work, but that's sort of the beginning of the story. And so that's these questions about economic activity and deflection of geodesics and so on. I haven't worked all this stuff out, but I have this feeling that there may be a correspondence, and that correspondence will be very interesting because it allows one then to leverage both the intuition from finance and the intuition from physics and merge them together. I mean, I have a friend who's well-known person who's spent a lot of time as a trader, and for him, for me, things are functions. They increase, they decrease, whatever. For him, everything is a put or a call, and I always have to try to remember, what does he mean by a put, a call? That's just some function that is, some particular, payoff function as a function of price. But these different intuitions that you get in different places have the notion of volatility that we're very familiar with in the financial case. How does that map into fluctuations in space-time in a physics case or something? I don't know what the correspondence will be. But these are things that I think there was one other part to that question which I perhaps now have forgotten, but about cryptocurrency. Look, I think that the thing that's interesting.
Proof of work algorithms versus Ethereum and proof of stake.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are many. We just actually did a little conference about distributed consensus, which is a story of part of that story. There are a whole collection of different ways to come to consensus about what has happened. And in fact, what we realized is that both work I did on cellular automata and other people did on cellular automata back a long time ago is deeply relevant. There's this blockchain called NKN that is NKN, needless to say, sort of rhymes with NKS, my new kind of science thing, and their system is very much based on kind of ideas from NKS, and it's based on using a notion of consensus that is a distributed consensus based on graph cellular automata that is different from the sort of the proof of work, proof of stake type approach. So there are a variety of differences. That one is, I think, a rather interesting one that some other people are trying to do as well, but NKN is probably the sort of most broadly deployed version of that. I think that that's an example of the thing to realize about blockchain is computation's general idea. There are different form factors, there are different workflows in which computation is used. What's happening in blockchain is autonomous computation. That's what computational contracts will be. they are purely autonomous computation, that no human initiated it. It wasn't, it isn't just living in a cloud, it's living in a way where something might happen in the real world that actuates what ends up being a giant chain of events in the kind of in the sort of blockchain world. And this kind of autonomous computation is, it's kind of the AI's takeover type scenario, because it's basically, you end up with these giant chains of autonomous computations, and that's an interesting situation to try to understand. And there are a lot of things that, something like an NFT is a very simple kind of thing about autonomous computation, but there are vastly more complex versions of that, and we're only at the very, very early stages of understanding sort of what's possible in this world of autonomous computation. I think the thing maybe I can end with is the statement that in just as all these sort of interactions between atoms of space are kind of what knit together the structure of space, I think these transactions in economics are what kind of knit together the economic system and lead to sort of coherence in things like prices in economic systems. And it's kind of interesting to see when you have a fork in a blockchain, it's like an event horizon in physical space-time, and when you have these closed countries and so on, that's another kind of event horizon type thing, analogous to what happens in physical space-time. But these are things we're just starting to explore. Hopefully, I don't know how long it'll be, next few months or something. For me, it's always it's a crazy thing, because I work in these different fields, and something like economics, I've sort of paid attention to it for decades, but don't really know it in great detail. And here I am thinking about sort of reforming the foundations of this field. And it's a scary thing, because it's kind of like, how much of the field should I really know? If I start knowing too many of the details, I'm already sunk in the mud. It's very hard to think, to stick your head out of the mud, so to speak, because you're already, but I know that it's, marginal utility of this and that and the other.
But at the same time, you need to familiarize yourself. So how do you strike that balance?
Yeah, well, it's a challenge, right? And I'm for economics, I keep on sort of poking away, and I have friends who are economists, and I talk to them a bit, and I'm still at the stage with economics where everybody tells me something I didn't know already. Eventually, in most fields that I work on, there comes this moment where most things that I hear about are things that I can readily fit in to something I already know, and I'm still on the upward curve with economics. But it always helps me with understanding a field, particularly one as complicated as economics, to have my own kind of theory about it, because then as I learn new things, I have at least a chance to fit them into a framework that I've already built.